on the Irish History Boys podcast this week. Don't miss it. Cormac is relentlessly plugging his book about the Boundary Commission. We're talking about the Boundary Commission. We're talking how the 9 counties of Ulster suddenly became the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. We're discussing how the Queen of Denmark visited the Soviet Union in 1975, the first royal to do so since the Romanovs were executed in 1918. And we're taking questions from you, the audience. Thank you very much for your questions. We were discussing why Edward Carson didn't become the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. He had a bad back, to be honest with you. That was basically it.
If the crass folly and gross ingratitude of the dairy corporators needed further illustration, it would be found in their choice of representatives commissioned to give evidence for the minority of Derry's people before the Boundary Commission. Why was Alderman Sir John McFarland passed over with contempt? He proved at the Guildhall on Tuesday that during the fateful crisis of 1920, when that magnificent and indispensable county of Donegal could have been held fast for the partitioned area, with the sanction and power of a British coalition government, he was faithful among the faithless, a sage among simpletons, a seer whose keen prophetic vision discerned the coming events that cast dark shadows before, shadows hidden from the victims of mental purblindness, who flung the solid substance of Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan away, and grasped the evanescent shadow of undisturbable ascendancy power. We want only 6 counties, said the short-sighted leaders to the British government. If we took 9, we might lose office and authority, salaries and patronage within a decade of years.
Beautifully read. Well done, Cormac. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Irish History Boys with me, Tim McGarry, and my very good colleague, Dr. Cormac Moore. The podcast where we explore Irish history inspired by what was reported 100 years ago in the Irish News and also 50 years ago in the Irish News. That particular passage came from the Irish News 100 years ago, 1925. My God. And beautifully written. The Irish News need to up their game in 2025.
You think so?
Oh, look, come on. What a phrase that is. The faithful among the faithless, a sage among simpletons. Oh, the mental purblindness who flung the solid substance of Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan away. So basically what we're talking about is, as we know, the Boundary Commission is the big issue in 1925 in Ireland. And there is debate raging in the Irish News and among other people about what exactly is going to happen to the 6 counties. The border going to be completely redrawn. And the Irish News here is talking about the folly of unionists who gave up the counties of Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan. And they gave those up. They gave those up a few years before the Boundary Commission, didn't they? And they kind of surrendered them because they made what many people would describe as they made a sectarian head count and said, we can control 6 counties. We can't really control 9 counties because there would be too much of an even
they
balance.
actually said, I think, the phrase I've seen written is that they would have been outbred by Catholics if they took the 9 counties.
And they were probably right, weren't they?
Well, judging on demographics to some degree now, yes. You know, if there was a vote taken of the 9 counties of Ulster, if that had made up Northern Ireland, I think the majority probably would have voted for United Ireland at this stage.
I think. Well, sorry, just to interrupt.
But back in 1920, there was about 55% Protestants, about 45% Catholics, and
in
the whole
9 counties of
9
Ulster.
counties,
so they chose 6. They were offered 4 as well, weren't they? That was on the table as well. Just when it
it wasn't that we were offered; it was kind of loosely kind of suggested. So it really started in the 3rd Home Rule crisis. When it looked like home rule for all of Ireland was going to happen. And then there was violent and huge resistance from Ulster Unionists, supported by the British Conservative Party. Their leader, Andrew Bonar-Law, said that there would be no lengths that they wouldn't go to help Ulster Unionists.
Basically threatening civil war over it.
Exactly, threatening civil war, threatening violence. And this was at a time when the Ulster Volunteer Force was formed, which subsequently saw the Irish Volunteers formed. So you were going towards civil war. But at the time there was a backbench MP from the Liberal Party, the governing Liberal Party with the Irish Parliamentary Party, Tim Agar-Roberts, and he put an amendment to the Home Rule Bill saying 4 counties should be excluded. Now, the big difference between having their own parliament as in Northern Ireland, but at this stage it was just talking about exclusion, that the counties that weren't part of a Dublin Home Rule Parliament would still remain in Westminster, fully aligned with Westminster. So he suggested 4 counties. But then, and then there was Dublin Castle. We're looking at different options, and it wasn't just
to roll back a little bit for some people who may not know the details of this. The Home Rule crisis was basically nationalist Ireland, or the whole of Ireland, were basically saying we want a form of independence from the British government.
Limited form, quite limited.
It was a limited form. It was kind of devolution. In the British
even less now, what we would consider devolution now would be a lot less, because the British would have had control over taxation, finances, all of them pretty much.
It wouldn't be a separate army or separate foreign
no,
policy or anything like that.
Separate foreign policy,
Home
no
Rule
way.
Parliament, the devolved Parliament in Dublin for all of Ireland, and Unionists, the Protestant majority in Ulster and Unionists generally said, no, we're not having that, because they feared that they would be dominated by Catholic Ireland effectively.
Yeah, and there was some justifiable reason that like only around the same time, a couple of years beforehand, there was a new decrees by the Catholic Church that, if there was a Catholic and Protestant married, that the children have to be brought up as Catholics.
The Natemere degree.
Yeah, exactly.
See, I know my Latin. I have a Latin A level, my friend, as well as a history level that I never boast about, but I have a Latin A level as well.
I don't. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know Latin.
You only have a leaving cert. That's not even an A level, my friend. Those are useless.
Why, the leaving cert worse than A levels?
Yeah, 3 A levels are worth about 20 of your leaving certs.
Can you even do 20 subjects?
I don't know.
But
the Natemere decree came in and basically said the Catholic Church was saying if you marry a Protestant that you must bring up your children as Catholics.
Yeah. But also there's another one as well, that if there was a legal issue involving a diocese, like you'd have to go before the bishop as opposed to go before the court. So there was these issues, and these were really significant issues, and it just showed the amount of control that the Catholic Church was trying to have on the Irish people. So you can imagine why Protestants in Ulster and other parts of Ireland were fearful of Home Rule being Rome Rule, even though the third Home Rule bit of the early 1910s had safeguards for minorities, enshrined in the actual legislation. So, but this is where.
But sorry, just to go back, the whole Home Rule issue, nationalism versus unionism, it was essentially very heavily sectarian. Virtually every single Protestant was a unionist, and virtually every single Catholic was a nationalist, without minor exceptions on the fringes.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Like in my previous book, Birth of the Border, there's a piece I wrote about Ernest Clark. Ernest Clark was the first headed civil service of Northern Ireland. So he set up the machinery, the administration of Northern Ireland before it actually came into being in May 1921. And he on the elections of 1921, he did an analysis of the results in each constituency, and it pretty much was in line. So for each way, the way people voted, whether it was for a nationalist party or unionist party, was in line with the 1911 census figures for Protestants and Catholics. So almost, yeah. If you're a Catholic, you're a nationalist, and if you're a Protestant, you're a unionist.
Do you remember
that was the
Do you remember a certain Secretary of State came to Northern Ireland in recent years? Ms. Karen Bradley.
Ms. Karen
Bradley. One of the many.
I think she's only known for that, is she?
One of the many useless Secretaries of State we had, who'd been here 2 years and then given an interview saying she didn't realise that most Catholics
was she here for 2 years? Was she?
She was here for 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So she made a big impression.
She said, that she didn't realise that most Catholics voted for nationalist parties and most Protestants voted for unionist parties. You go, well, still remains a century later. So what's the Irish News getting at here? The Boundary Commission is happening, and the Irish News is having a go at Derry.
So we go back again, because as we were saying, so this idea of excluding all or some of Ulster really gathers momentum from 1913 really. And like unionists, I think unionists, as a kind of a stopgap to the whole bill, suggest all 9 counties be excluded.
Right.
But then it really goes. So Dublin Castle do their figures as well, and they suggest around 5 counties. It wasn't like just going on county by county basis. It was more like poor law unions and district electrical divisions. And they were around 5 counties they were recommending, give or take, for exclusion. But then it became really. From around the summer 1914, it's 6 counties. That's what the unionists want. They want 6 permanently excluded.
Yes, the permanent issues is also important as well, because originally it was kind of there's going to be Home Rule for Ireland, and the British government didn't know how to deal with unions. Say, well, we'll have an area that will be excluded from Home Rule, but it'll only be on a temporary basis. And nationalists kind of we're not happy about that, but they kind of went along with that, didn't they?
Yeah,
And then the unions.
Well, they eventually went along with it. They were resisted for a long time, because first of all, like the Tyrone and Fermanagh, in my first chapter of the Boundary Commission book. that I've just published is a.
What? Did you publish a book, Cormac?
I did, yeah.
Hang on, I've got a copy of it here. I got it.
Did you?
I got it free, by the way. But it is worth reading, by the way. The Root of All Evil by Cormac Moore.
Well, you got it free. Just let everyone know because you have kindly launched my book.
I've launched your book, yes.
So that's why you got a free copy.
I got a free copy. It's a very, very good book. It's very detailed, but it is a fascinating story as well.
It's very complex, but I find it fascinating. I find it absolutely fascinating.
Yes, and so do many people, including our producer, who can't get enough of the Boundary Commission.
Did he not say he was sick of? No,
he didn't say it. No, but it is. I mean, it's kind of important that we still are having the same arguments today about a border poll and all of that. But the border that we're talking about is the border that was finally established in 1925.
But it was being talked about for this kind of decade leading up to the Boundary Commission. And what was and in 1914 it was a conference in King George V. He organised a conference in Buckingham Palace in July, just after Franz Ferdinand had been assassinated, in late June. So Europe's on the brink of war, but there's a big chance of a civil war in Ireland. So he tries and gets the heads together, and it falls down on Ulster Unionists want 6 counties permanently excluded. And nationalists don't want any excluded, and they rightly say as well. Look, what about Tyrone and Fermanagh? Tyrone and Fermanagh have majority Catholics and populations. And Armagh, and this is one thing that there's never really much talked about. Armagh had a smaller a Unionist majority than a Protestant majority than Tyrone and Fermanagh had Catholic majorities.
Right.
But no one ever talked about Armagh being included in the. In a Dublin Parliament,
right.
So that was they were saying, why should Fermanagh and Tyrone be excluded? But they did finally accept around 1916 actually that we would consent to temporary exclusion of 6 counties, only temporary. And they actually put a vote to it, the big nationalist conference in summer of 1916. This is after the Easter Rising, so the British government were trying to get a settlement to calm things down. And there was a big divide within nationalism. So you had people from Belfast, East Ulster were generally going okay with the temporary exclusion of 6 counties, whereas people from the west and south.
Did they really think it would be temporary?
I think they did. Yeah, I think they did. I don't like they definitely didn't think it was going to be permanent. They would never have accepted permanent. So but whereas nationalists from the west and south of the 6 counties were really opposed to the exclusion of those counties. But once it was realised that, David Lloyd George, he was Minister for Munitions of the British government at the time. He was the one that was brokering this deal. But none of quite two-faced, the Welsh wizard, So he told Carson that it's going to be permanent, and he told John Redmond it was going to be temporary.
Right.
And once Redmond found out that Carson had been told it was going to be permanent, they withdrew from the agreement. And also Southern unions were opposed to it, as were a lot of Conservatives in Britain as well. But then let's fast forward to 1919, and the Government of Ireland Bill is being... so basically... The British government realised after the election of 1918, when Sinn Féin trounced the Irish Party.
So Sinn Féin, after the war, Sinn Féin win the election, sweep the board, except in Ulster, obviously. And they say, well, sod home rule. We're not even interested in talking about home rule anymore. We're going for a republic. We're setting up our own parliament in Dublin, the Dáil,
which they did
illegally, and then the War of Independence started basically on the back of that, and they're saying, is there an argument? I mean, if unionism had go back to 1912 or 13 or 14, unionists have said, look, I tell you what, let's calm this down. Let's have home rule for all of Ireland, and we need guarantees or whatever. They would have ended up in a better position, would they? In a united Ireland, still within the empire, if they rather than were nationalists and Republicans pushed into being more Republican by unionist opposition to this?
Oh yeah, well look, many people claim, and I think with justification, that it was the unions who brought the gun into Irish politics.
Yeah,
they were the first ones who armed. Yeah, with Larne and Donegal.
Well, a good friend of mine, Dr. David Hume, would argue that the gun was always in Irish politics, and the IRB, and there were always Republican movements. Now I always said they were kind of on the fringes, but he said there were always guns in Irish politics. We had the Fenian movement,
but in that period, the Fenian movement, when was the last Fenian uprising? 1867. So there had been very little violence up to the Easter Rising. And there was a real threat with the arming of Ulster and nationalists in Ireland. and before that. So yeah, I think of course if there was a home rule constitution for all Ireland, that would have changed everything, of course. So the whole series of events that happened afterwards would not have happened, because it would have been there would have been a solution which would have been acceptable to most Irish people at the time. So yes, there wouldn't have been the massive violence that there was from the Easter Rising right up to 23 and so on.
And unionism basically got what it wanted because it had the ears of the British government.
Well, it depends on what unionism you're talking about. If you're an Ulster unionist from Monaghan or Donegal or Cavan, you definitely did not get what you wanted.
Yes, because of course, 1912 was it? When was this Covenant?
1912. Yeah,
1912 September, Ulster Day, still celebrated by certain quarters.
And huge numbers from all those three counties.
500,000 people signed the Ulster Covenant saying they will resist Home Rule by all means necessary. And you could only sign it if you're from Ulster, so loads of unionists from Cavan, Monaghan and Donegal signed this covenant saying, we're going to resist Home Rule. And then within 3 or 4 years, the unionists in Monaghan, Cavan and Donegal get a message from the boys in Belfast saying, sorry about this.
Sorry about that. Well, 1916, they were the relationship with Edward Carson started to change in 1916 when they were abandoned basically in 1906 when he was ready to accept 6-county exclusion. But it really came to a head when the government. So when this becomes real in 1919 when the British government said, look, Sinn Féin are doing their own thing. They've got the illegal parliament. The IRA are fighting against the RIC. This is 1919, so the violence in Ireland in the War of Independence doesn't really take off until the summer of 1920, basically. With the arrival of Black and Tans and auxiliaries, and the IRA is a lot more strengthened at that stage as well. But in autumn of 1919, because the Home Rule Act of the Third Home Rule Act was passed in September 1914.
Yes.
So it was in suspense.
Until the end of the First World War. It wasn't
so
the First World War there, because they didn't know there was going to be a second one. They went until the end of the Great War, the World War.
Yeah, but they thought, look, we'll keep in suspension until the end of the war. But once the war ended, they had to do something. Like, it was still there. So it's a bit like the Legacy Act now, repeal and replace. So they had to go, let's come up with a solution. And they knew that Sinn Féin weren't going to deal with them, and they weren't trying to appease them. It was just Ulster Unionists. But they publicly said, at least, that they wanted, United Ireland. Yeah. So they offered a Council of Ireland, so both parliaments would meet and discuss issues of fisheries, diseases of animals, railways, things like that. But they're going to have 9 counties. The British government committee suggested 9 counties instead of 6. So you'd have 9 and 23 counties.
Right.
Imagine a 23 county state. It sounds different, weird. Doesn't it?
Ulster Unionists could have been proper Ulster Unionists.
Exactly. Yes, and then they could have actually called the country Ulster, as opposed to as they still call it Ulster, even though it's only 6 of the 9 counties. But the British government was saying, look, we want to unite Ireland. We think there's a better chance of ending partition if you don't have such a big division, 2/3 versus 1/3 Protestant Catholic. If you have 55%, 45% Protestant Catholic, that to me would suggest they would cooperate better with each other, and it would tend towards reconciliation and cooperation.
So the War of Independence is going in 1919, 1920. Sinn Féin are the boycotting Parliament.
Yeah.
So when the British government say, we're going to introduce this Government of Ireland Act to set up Northern Ireland. There's no real national. There's about 6 or a dozen nationalist MPs.
7. Well, there were 6 from Ireland, and then one, T.P. O'Connor, who's a nationalist who's elected in Liverpool, and he is an Irish nationalist.
So there's 6 or 7 MPs who are in opposition. There could have been 70, but Sinn Féin, are boycotting the Parliament. So basically, Unionists and the Tories push this through and get whatever they want. Yeah.
But even people have argued, if Sinn Féin were there, maybe they could have, at least affected changes to the Act, to the bill, the Government of Ireland bill. They could have contributed towards it, but they couldn't really have. The Labour and the Liberal Party, the rump of the Liberal Party that stayed with Herbert Asquith, they were the opposition. They were totally opposed to the Government of Ireland bill, and obviously the 6-7 MPs, Irish MPs, were opposed to it as well. But the majority that the government had was absolutely massive. It was a coalition of David Lloyd George's liberal coalitions and the Conservatives, and they had something like 450 seats out of 650. So if you add 8, and obviously Sinn Féin's 73 seats, well, it was actually 69 people, and it was 4 of them got elected in 2 constituencies.
That's all right.
69 people had 73 seats. So,
They were personating as MPs as well, were they? I do too. Talk about double jobbing.
Like De Valera got elected in Clare and Mayo, and
Right.
Collins got elected in Armagh and Cork. So there was a Griffith
So
got
you could
elected.
stand for 2 seats.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, 3 because I'm great.
What if you won all 3?
De Valera.
You only got 1 vote. Did you still?
Well, I presume you could
co-opt.
Co-opt someone into that seat. But De Valera ran against Joe Devlin in West Belfast. He ran for 3 constituencies, and Joe Devlin beat him convincingly. But anyway, so if those 69 people, that 73 seats of Sinn Féin had gone to Westminster, they wouldn't have affected any change anyway, because the coalition of Conservatives and Labour coalition was so strong that they were going to push through whatever they wanted. So this Walter Long committee that sets up the Government of Ireland bill, we want 9 counties in the new
This
Northern
is a
Ireland.
Tory suggestion then.
Yeah.
Rather
Tories.
than the unionist suggestion. The unionists go, no, we
Oh
want
no,
6.
they certainly don't suggest it, because they're totally against it. So then when and James Craig is in government at this stage as well. James Craig he's not leader of the Ulster Unionist Party yet. Carson still is, but he's a parliamentary kind of a secretary, like a junior minister, to Walter Long, believe it or not, who's the First Lord of the Admiralty and the person responsible for the Government of Ireland Bill Committee. But Long was very sick at the time. He was very ill. He died actually in 1924, and he had to retire in 1921 through illness. But Craig actually does a lot of his job. But he has the ear of the British government, as does Carson. Carson knows all of these people very well, and Craig actually suggests, what about a boundary commission? Why don't we have a boundary commission to decide the borders?
Craig suggests
it to the British government, because he does not want 9 counties.
Right.
So he lets a border to decide where people want to stay or go. So he suggests a boundary commission, and the British government did think about it seriously, but it said it might lead to violence, so we'll leave it.
Right.
If you were taking plebiscite votes and all of that, it might lead to outright. So then there was a debate within Ulster Unionist Council, and obviously unionists from Cavan and Monaghan, like Farnham and all of these Saundersons and the Leslies and so on, they're all totally opposed to the 3 Ulster counties and all. And there are 70,000 Ulster Unionists in those 3 counties, like Cavan, Monaghan.
I
and
think I remember there's a famous photograph, I think, of Edward Carson reviewing the UVF in Monaghan. I think there's thousands of them. And the UVF were very big.
Massive.
In Monaghan.
And look, there still are orange parades there. So they were totally aghast, like absolutely disgusted they were being abandoned. And they did bring up the Solemn League Covenant in 1912.
Well, you would, wouldn't you?
And also,
I signed a covenant, mate. What's this
but
about?
also the Somme, if you look at the Somme, like who died in the Somme, it wasn't just unions from the 6 counties. It was it was actually Irish people from all over the island died. Right. But there's a big concentration of people who died in the Somme from Monaghan, Cavan and Donegal. Right. And they were disgusted they were being abandoned. And actually it was actually Thomas Moles.
It seems very cynical, doesn't it? I mean, was it just basically a cynical head count then? And
head count?
Go to your mates and go, sorry lads, of all the best.
Well, actually, Thomas Moles said exactly that to his large degree. He said, look, if there were, and this is the 1919, 1920s, this is about 8 years after the Titanic had sunk. And Thomas Moles, he's editor of the Belfast Telegraph, he's an Ulster Union's MP, and he said, look, if there's a ship is sinking and you've only got lifeboats to save 2/3, should we all drown so that none of us can be saved? So this is the kind of language that have been used. And so the Ulster Unionist Council voted overwhelmingly. I think it was about 350 votes to 80 to go with 6 counties for Northern Ireland and abandon 3 counties. And then you had a lot of people leaving the Ulster Unionist Council from those 3 counties and from the Ulster Ladies Unionist Council as well. Absolutely disgusted with being abandoned.
So the Government of Ireland Act 1920 comes into force in early 1921.
May 1921.
There's a Northern Ireland Parliament, and it's set up, and its jurisdiction.
No, unions didn't want that either. They wanted to stay fully within the United Kingdom, but then they realised, and James Craig's brother Charles, he goes, actually, this actually gives us all we want, all we fought for, all we armed ourselves for.
Control.
Exactly. It was better. It was better than being on a Westminster.
So they're against home rule, a home rule parliament for Dublin, but they have a far nicer home rule parliament for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And it is 2/3. It's 66%, 33% Catholics, and it does give them a permanent majority.
Well,
I feel
100. Many years so far.
Yeah,
105.
Well, at the
That's fairly-
time, at the time,
fairly
they felt-
permanent.
But it's interesting to say that because Craig met Collins in January 1922, and he didn't talk about 100 years. He was going like, maybe we'll be united in 20,
Yeah.
40 years. I'll never walk into an Irish Parliament, but who knows? That'll happen 20, 40 years down the road.
Yeah.
But yeah, so not a lot of people were predicting it was going to last for over 100 years. That's
Right.
for sure. But
Well, I suppose you forget about this when you talk about history. People are in their time; they don't see what's happening next.
Of course.
And when people were talking about partition, they didn't necessarily see it as kind of forever.
yeah, well, Irish nationalists definitely were at fault for that as well.
Right.
They thought
tell
it
me
was
about
it was a kind of a rump parliament that just didn't have a chance of surviving. A
I'm not just
pygmy
looking at-
parliament. I think Irish News at one stage called it a pygmy parliament.
A pygmy parliament. I'm not being ignorant here and you're boring me and I'm looking at my phone. I wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, you can get in touch at any time on WhatsApp or email. Let us know if you have any questions. You can send us a WhatsApp message or voice note to 07483 313 842. That's 07483 313 842. Or drop us an email on irishhistoryboys@gmail.com. That's irishhistoryboys@gmail.com, because we've already had fan mail.
Yes, yes.
Well, I say fan mail. No, I genuinely, we have a message here from first episode, Stephen Kennedy. Stephen Kennedy says, as someone who was raised in the unionist tradition, I have to say I enjoy your podcast. He's talking about me there. Thank you very much. When will you be discussing a new Ireland and what it would look like? We discuss that every week, I think. Is it true that circa 78% of people in the Republic of Ireland want a united Ireland, but this drops to 38% when asked will they agree to taxation to pay for it? Well, we might discuss that. I'll just talk about another question here. Joe Steeden, I'm really enjoying the podcast from England. Please keep up the great work. The great work. We're doing great work. I have a few questions that come to me when listening and reading a bit of Irish history. Apologies if I'm being an ignorant Brit with these. Don't worry. Don't worry. You could probably get yourself a job as a Secretary of State if you know nothing about Northern Ireland. Let's see. Curious around Edward Carson's. Yes, this is what I wanted. Edward Carson's vision of Northern Ireland. As I understand, he didn't want to alienate the Catholic population. Given this, why did he not take the opportunity to be the first leader of Northern Ireland? So. This is very relevant. Edward Carson.
Yeah. He's the leader of the Ulster Union.
Leader of the Ulster
Party.
Union. A lot of people in Ulster don't even know he was a Dubliner.
Oh yeah, when he had hard. I think there's only records of him stepping foot in Ulster. I think maybe once or twice in his lifetime before he becomes effectively the Ulster Union's leader.
Yeah.
But they love him though, and he's still revered by.
Oh yeah.
I think you might be aware of a statue.
Is there a statue? Yeah, very good statue.
Yeah, like Ian Paisley, for example, idolised Edward Carson.
Yeah.
So he definitely is a huge mythological figure almost within Ulster
So
Union.
the vision that Carson had, he wanted to stop Home Rule, and the argument that a lot of historians say is Edward Carson wanted to stop Home Rule and was using Ulster as a lever, thinking, well, nationalists will never agree to exclude bits of Ireland, they'll never agree to our partition. So if we push this whole, we're not having a Home Rule Parliament, then we will save all of Ireland for the Empire.
Yeah, I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. I do. Obviously, I think first of all, yeah, he wanted all of Ireland in remain part of Britain. Of course, he wanted that. And he was close with kind of what became Southern Unionists.
Yeah.
But then by 1913, that kind of strategy of using Ulster to keep all of Ireland within Britain, that kind of ends. And
that ends when? Sorry.
By 1913,
right.
It becomes actually policy as opposed to
Right.
a way to stop all of Home Rule. And he becomes the firmest advocate of partition
Right.
from there on in. You know, he always talks about keeping the 6 counties permanently excluded from Ireland after that. You know, so he's the architect of partition. Right. You can't say that this guy's against partition. He doesn't want any of Ireland home leaving the empire. When he does his best to exclude the 6 counties. Right. From the rest of Ireland, you know, so he supports all of this. He actually said about the Government of Ireland bill. Actually, I see a benefit of having our own parliament, and you can't get rid of a parliament, that easily once it's there.
Yeah.
So and he was, and even afterwards, up until his death in 1935, he was regularly coming to Belfast, to Northern Ireland.
Was he? Because I heard that they unveiled his statue in 1933. Yeah. Not many people get a statue when they're still alive, so he's absolutely revered. He's the only person buried in St Anne's Cathedral.
Yeah.
There's literally a big slab with just the name Carson written on it, assuming that everybody.
A bit like Parnell in Glasnevin Cemetery.
Well, presumably pre-Frank as well. Frank Carson. Anyway, you never heard of Frank? Anyway,
I have vaguely. Being from the south, I've heard of Frank Carson. But
very different man to Edward Carson. Very different
little
vibe
different.
off the two of them.
Edward
Edward Carson, not many gags out of him, and a total hypochondriac. Edward Carson is
Total hypochondriac.
But anyway,
yeah.
I heard
Alvin Jackson had a great book on comparing Edward Carson and John Redmond. Really good
read
book.
it. It's a very good book.
Really good book.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Oh, I thought all you were going to say it was a good book. No, and the Edward Carson, he didn't take. He lived in England. His entire life. After all the politics of Northern Ireland is established, he famously said, "Oh, make sure to take care of the minority." He doesn't really take any interest after that. You say he comes back and forward. I heard that when he came to unveil his statue, that it was unveiled, huge crowds, but he refused to go into Stormont and kind of just went home straight afterwards. Is that any?
I wasn't aware of what his itinerary was for the when his statue was unveiled. I didn't hear that. No.
Did he take much interest in? He didn't want to be the leader of Ulster.
Yeah. So the reason why,
which is Joe's question, why did he not want to be leader? And in fact, as well, in your excellent book, "The Root of All Evil" by the Boundary Commission by Cormac Moore, excellent book.
Thank you.
Edward Carson was actually offered the job of representing Northern Ireland at the Boundary Commission as well, which he backed out of as well. So.
But no, when he didn't back out of it, he was kind of forced out of it. The Northern Ireland government said that they didn't want Carson because it was too. Actually, it was the unionists from Monaghan, Cavan, and Donegal who still were bitter over the. Well, it wasn't that long ago before that, but they were still bitter from being abandoned. So they didn't want Carson involved because say if the commission decided to get rid of Newry, then Carson would be blamed again for getting rid of parts of it.
Right.
So it was actually the Northern Ireland government who were very lukewarm on Carson being the Northern Ireland representative. But before that, he actually decided to retire as Ulster Unionist leader in February 1921. Just at the Home Rule or the Government of Ireland Act had been enacted in December 1920. It was going to come into being in May. And he felt he was too old, that he should be a younger, more energetic man. And
he was born in 1854, so 40, say, he was in his 60s then.
Yeah.
And he was
a hypochondriac.
Well-known hypochondriac.
Very well-known hypochondriac.
I didn't realise that. I did a couple of documentaries about him, but he spent his time writing letters to Lady Londonderry, basically. You want to hear about my bad back and my throat's awful and my head. He spent his time just whinging and moaning.
And he lived he died in 935, so he's 81 or something. So
but also he was the double act of unionism. So Craig was the leader, the administrator, the organizer. Carson's the front man. He does the big speeches.
And Carson had been in government as well, like during the First World War. He was AG, and he was was he First Lord of Admiralty as well? I think when after briefly when Churchill has to resign after Darndale's. But he's not good in government. Like, he's actually really bad. He's a great man for talking, and giving speeches. Like, he's a very famous lawyer, of course. But he's not very good when it comes to actually administration and doing the nuts and bolts of your day-to-day job. So he actually it's a wise from a Northern Ireland's perspective that he isn't the first Prime Minister, because he would not have been a good Prime Minister probably.
You saying Craig was?
Well, no, Craig was seen as good for unionists. He was. And he was a lot more solid, more grounded for the kind of day-to-day running of a
So basically, the reason to answer Joe's question, why did he not, take that away? He was old. He was a bit of a hypochondriac. He'd done his work. He basically went, and left the field triumphant after winning 3 cups in the treble, and go, I'm away here.
And he said,
don't want to do another season.
Look, it needs to be taken over. This is the big job. It needs to be taken over by a young, energetic man. That's what he said at the time. So no, a lot of things Carson said were untrue. He often was very theatrical when he said. So you shouldn't read too much into a lot of what he said. Yeah. But it's his actions that is important, and he was a firm supporter of Northern Ireland from and he's buried in Belfast as well.
Oh, he gets a state funeral. There's footage of it, which is amazing. You can look it up on YouTube. I mean, it is literally a state funeral. The great patriotic leader, the leader of their patriotic rebellion. I think they describe him as.
Describe him as?
Northern Ireland half of Northern Ireland comes to a standstill for
2/3 of it
comes to a standstill, and it is. It's amazing. He's revered.
Absolutely.
To this day, a lot of people may not know the detail. Younger people may not know the details, but he's still the man who basically created Northern Ireland.
He is the architect of partition, and he can't get away from that. Even if a lot of even historians, but other people say, Carson didn't want a partition and he was against it. He wanted all of Ireland in the UK. Yeah, he initially did, but then once that that door was closed, once he knew Home Rule was coming in, he was firmly in support of partition. So he is the architect of partition.
And his famous speech where he condemns he just said, what a fool I was.
Yeah,
what a fool
the
I
rant.
was.
The rant.
We were only pawns used in a game by the Tories as part of their...
Get into their power, yes.
That's been widely misinterpreted. That was basically a rant about the government, about the treaty, wasn't it?
It was about actually giving into murderers, so Sinn Féin thugs, and basically
the murder gangs.
Yeah, so you basically surrendered, which was the truce, 1911, or in July 1921, and.
But that's been misinterpreted by nationalists going, you see, he didn't really mean it. He didn't really mean it, but in fact, it's worse than that.
In the speech, he actually was saying, you've picked on poor Ulster. What is poor Ulster on? It's actually only supported you, and you're picking on her. Leave Ulster be, So it was actually a pro-partition speech. Right. His big problem was with actually having a deal with Sinn Féin, giving them a free state. Basically.
Giving them too much power.
He wanted he was like a hawk. At the time, when there was a truce, he was against the truce. He was always on for putting more troops into Ireland. Dealing with Ireland, the Free State, what became the Free State part as a crown colony. So he was not. To that question there about he wanted Catholics to be treated well, minorities treated well, but he was a hawk.
He didn't do much about it, did he?
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like both Craig and Carson were big on talking up that we need to treat minorities well, but when it came to actions, that never transpired. Yeah.
Okay, so this editorial is 1925, and it's basically saying that unionism was stupid to get rid of those 3 counties, but it wasn't really, was it? I mean, it was kind of a tactics go. It worked.
It did in terms of a very strong majority, a stable majority. But for the Ulster unions of all 6 counties, it worked fine. But for the Ulster unions of the 3 counties, they were abandoned.
Yeah, but this editorial is implying that kind of they were abandoned, and the bits of them could come back to Northern Ireland. Am I right?
That was up for debate with the Boundary Commission. If you look at Joseph R. Fisher, he was appointed by the British government to be the Northern Ireland commissioner, even though we now know that. It was the Northern Ireland government who recommended them to the British government. So he'd been saying for a couple of years, we should get Donegal. We want Donegal back and get rid of what you call Afghanistan, like South Armagh, places like that.
Yeah, is that what he's described?
Yeah, so he's described like a place like South Armagh and other places where they've massive nationalist majorities. Get rid of them, but we don't want them. But we can get parts of Donegal, all of Donegal. I think he would have preferred, and even Craig would want the Donegal. And then North Monaghan places that with strong unionist majorities. So that was up for debate. And as we know with the Boundary Commission award, that never happened to be realised. They were going to get parts of East Donegal and parts of North Monaghan, and going to lose South Armagh, including Crossmaglen.
Well, look, I think we've done a good job. We've answered Joe's question. That's not like us. We've answered Joe's question as to why Edward Carson did not become leader of unionism. Too old and done his bit and wanted a quiet life in England. And was a very wealthy man as well. Very wealthy and successful barrister. There's a very good documentary that I made. No, I was part made of Edward Carson and Oscar Wilde.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, it was very good. Yeah,
about the famous trial in 18. So he's a very, very rich, successful barrister who, kind of dabbled in Irish politics.
And he was once he resigned as Ulster Unions leader, he became a member of the House of Lords. Yeah, so he remained there for the rest of his life.
So we've answered your question, Joe. It's not like us. And we'll not talk about the future United Ireland will look like, because that might take more than one episode. But we will get back.
We
will definitely talk about
the next episode or two. We'll definitely talk about new Ireland.
What it would look like, and what bits are going to be in it or not in it, or whether it'll ever happen ever.
Absolutely.
Our lifetime, your lifetime. What age are you, Cormac?
I'm 49.
49. I'm 60. My lifetime. Do you think it'll happen in my lifetime?
What the Leo Varadkar said will happen in his lifetime there.
Right.
That's a long ago. He's younger than me. So
are you saying I'm good clean living? I could go to 120. I could be
You're going 120. You're only in middle age now. Half your life ahead of you.
Exactly. So, Listen, there's a story from 1975 that you wanted to briefly talk about just at the end of this episode. Will I read this, will I?
Yeah.
May the 29th, 1975. Not Irish politics, but about where Queen Margaret Is that how you? Is it Margaret?
Margaret, yeah,
Margaret of Denmark arrived in Moscow yesterday to become the first reigning European monarch to make an official visit to Moscow since the shooting of the Russian royal family after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. 1975, the Soviets at the height of their power, and it was weird men on the who was in charge in 75.
Brezhnev.
Was
Brezhnev,
Leonid Brezhnev after that. So this is basically the first royal visit to Soviet Communist Russia in 1975, and it was seen as a slightly important because this is the first royal to go. And was she related to the?
She had some relation.
Suppose all
with
those
the
royal
Romanovs.
families were related, weren't they?
There was a lot of interbreeding going on there. That's right. If you ever see, I think it was Kaiser William II, King George V, and Tsar Nicholas II together. They could be brothers.
They could be brothers.
Brothers out there. Look very, very alike.
A lot of regal inbreeding, was there? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am saying that. Yes, a lot of it. But yeah, I found it fascinating when I saw this piece in the Irish News that it was 60 years almost before a royal family almost recognised the royals visited the Russians after what had happened.
Yeah.
Not to all the people who would have been killed maybe by the Bolsheviks, but with one particular family that was killed.
I don't want to criticise your maths, but it's not 60 years. 1918 to 75.
It's almost 60 years.
No, it's not 60.
I think it's
18
almost
from
60
75.
years.
Somebody do 18 from
It's
75.
57 years, no?
Is it 57 years? No, 47 years.
57 years.
And you talk among yourselves. I'm going to do 70. Hang on, 7. It is. Sorry, you're right. Sorry, it's almost 60 years. Yeah.
Anyway,
can we edit that bit? No. I had A level in Latin and history, not maths. Okay,
clearly,
so it's almost 60 years.
Yeah.
So no royals had been to the Soviet Union wasn't welcoming of too many people at that stage. Anyway.
Oh no, I think it was trying, particularly at starting years, it was trying to have as many diplomatic relations as possible to be recognised, on the world stage. But obviously, a lot of countries did not reciprocate. But I actually I know you did your A levels history and A levels. But I actually did my history project for my leaving cert was actually on the assassination of the Tsar family and the children and the whole.
Oh wow! And I heard you got a C+. Well done.
But it was actually I love Russian history. I don't speak Russian, which is a bit of a problem. But I love Russian history, and I'm fascinated by the whole Romanovs and not just from 1613 onwards. I think they're fascinating kind of a period of history, but also their fall from grace and the. And really was internally within within the Lenin's government it was a real should be that is this going to work in our favour or not to kill the Bolsheviks and they decided that they would kill them all, and it was quite brutal because the royal family had all their jewels kind of in their clothes.
Right.
Still in clothes. So when they shot them first, a lot of them didn't die, so they had to use bayonets and all of that. And
I was slightly confused. Was that officially sanctioned by Lenin and the boys?
Oh,
Was it a conscious decision? It wasn't a spontaneous, because they were held somewhere in the country.
Ekaterinburg,
and it wasn't spontaneous. It was kind of, orders came.
Oh, absolutely.
Get rid of them.
There's no way you're going to do that without Lenin's orders.
Right.
That was a massive thing to do, there was and there was they knew they were about to embark on a civil war, and a lot of Western powers were going to get involved in that. They knew this is going to be
so this is like
huge controversy.
This is like the French Revolution, execution of the king, or Charles I and the English Civil War. It was a big deal.
It's a big deal, and obviously the whole rumor about Anastasia, one of the daughters survived. Around for decades and decades. That rumor persisted.
Did your leaving cert examine that in detail, and did you find if she is?
No. Leaving cert projects aren't as thorough, should we say, as a PhD.
Not as good as A levels, even.
As you say, I'll give you from one A level, I'll give you 20 leaving cert subjects. So, there you go. But it just brings back memories of doing leaving cert. I love that topic, that subject. It was and you feel a huge sympathy for the family, and
it was particularly nasty and brutal. It
was a brutal,
the whole family was killed. There were children as well.
And their servants, all the children were killed. And Alexander, the boy, the heir to the throne, he had haemophilia, so he was, and that's when Rasputin comes into the family because he.
Oh yes, of course,
he helps with the Alexander's haemophilia, or Alexis, haemophilia. And the Queen Alexandra, the Tsarina Alexandria, she becomes enthralled with Rasputin and so on. And then he's killed in December 1916, but it takes a lot of attempts to kill him.
Oh, this is Rasputin.
Yeah, they were like
Yeah.
shooting him, and they're throwing him into the water,
Yeah.
they're beating lumps out of him.
Yeah.
And apparently, he only died when he was drowned, basically. But they went a lot of effort to kill him in 60 minutes.
And he was also, if you know your song, Russia's Greatest Love Machine. Boney M.
Boney M, yeah.
Yeah, look that up, younger listeners.
Is that 60 years ago?
Oh,
now, is it, or-
that was more accurate.
57 years ago. I
I'd
think,
just
yeah.
say that Boney M's interpretation of Russian history is probably more accurate than your leaving cert, to be honest with you.
Oh, probably is. They probably know what happened to Anastasia. We might ask them.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's the end of this episode. Thank you very much to my comrade.
Comrade?
Yes, come on. We're talking about the Russian Revolution.
Soviet Union, yeah.
Of the Irish History Boys. As I say, you can get in touch with us on WhatsApp or email anytime. Any questions, send us. We do answer questions. 07483 313 842 or drop us an email at irishhistoryboys@gmail.com. Cormac, let's do it again sometime soon.
Till next time.